All right. So, next thing on Money Week. We've already talked about um, money as a store of value, right? Where it represents something real, and therefore, because it's real and it's an actual thing that you would use for its own sake, it always has value. It's always important. And then we've also talked about um, inflation and deflation and how, you know, the value of money can change over time. But here's a question. What if money was just gone? Like there was no money anymore. Well, we go back to the idea of money as a store of value, and we would say, oh well, then people would barter and trade, right? It would say, I have grain, you have meat, trade. And yeah, that probably would happen. But that's not necessary to happen. And that's what's interesting about if money were gone, is what would the world look like? Because there's three ways to think about it. One is a new money would come out of somewhere, right? That that if dollar bills were gone, well then it'd be, some other kind of currency, whether that be gold or rice or just another paper bill. Like the idea of money going away completely is very hard to imagine. But we didn't always have money as it exists today. Earlier in this series, I talked about how there used to be gift giving economies where one tribe or group of people or whatever, they would go and visit their friends somewhere else. And then, they would give gifts and presents and stuff. And it was one directional. Just say, we came to you. Here's here's a whole bunch of stuff that you might like. And then next year, those people come back to you and say, hey, we love the stuff you gave us. Here's some of our stuff. And that's something that happened. And so you can imagine a gift-giving economy where people make stuff and then they say, here you go, my dude. I thought you might like that. And then maybe they reciprocate, maybe they don't. But then everything would change. Because instead of expecting reciprocation and saying, this is how you act, this is what you do, that I pony up some money and you give me stuff. Instead, you have a much less entitled framework where you don't deserve anything. You aren't owed anything. Where instead of saying, I did X, so then Y must happen, nothing's guaranteed. And that may be scary, but that's also beautiful. Because if people aren't required to give you stuff, well, then it's so much nicer when they do. This is the difference between charity and government programs. Because with a government program, it's not nice. It's expected. That I am in a certain situation, and therefore I am entitled to a benefit. And if that benefit doesn't come, I don't feel like, oh, I guess I expected that to happen anyway. No, like, I expected it to go on forever. You kidding me? That I sign up to this benefit, to receive this benefit forever, and then you cut me off? What a jerk move. Which is a very entitled mindset. Because obviously that money isn't coming from thin air. Those resources aren't coming in from thin air. Actual people are working so that I could get that benefit. But I don't see those people, and I don't see their sacrifice for my benefit. No. I see a government that promised me something, and I'm holding them to their promises. But with charity, it's totally different. I expect nothing from these people. I say, well, I don't deserve anything. But then they say, we know, but we're going to give to you anyway. And that feels so good. That feels so nice. And you say, oh, I feel so cared about, so loved. I feel good by receiving from that way. But you also might feel guilty. Where you might feel guilty that I don't deserve this. That maybe I made some mistakes along the way that led up to me not being able to provide for myself. So that way I'm dependent on these other people, which, yeah, they're nice. Yes, they're compassionate, and I love that they're giving me stuff, but at the same time, it makes me feel like I failed. And that's the dichotomy with charity, where you feel guilt for needing charity, but you feel loved receiving charity. Whereas the dichotomy of the more expected system, where if it's a government program or a business venture or anything like that, where I do X, I get Y. I sign up for a program, I get a benefit. I work and do a job and produce a widget, and then that widget sells and I get money, right? I do something and there is a quantified expected outcome for me. Well, that's much less empathetic. There's no emotion in there, which is not inherently a bad thing, but it's something to take note of. And so, if this whole calculated, cold process of saying, well, this costs this much, and that costs that much, and so I think that's a fair trade, blah, 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 etc. Well, if you remove a lot of that by saying, hey, money, the thing that you compare prices with, that's just gone. Well, in a gift-giving economy, I feel like there would be a lot more people that felt loved and felt compassion. But there would also be a lot more people who felt guilty, who felt worthless. Because that's the issue with receiving gifts. Is if you receive a gift, it means that the other person's thinking about you. But if you receive a gift also, it means that they think you could use that. So depending what they're gifting you, well, it can make you feel pretty low, pretty useless. But there is even another way. We had the bartering, right, where you pretty much just replace money with anything of value. Then we have the gift giving, where instead of having a transaction, I give and maybe you'll give back. We'll see. But then we have the next thing, self-reliance, where you don't do anything for anyone. You provide for yourself, and then you don't need to buy anything because you already have it. Now, this gets around that emotional issue of saying, hey, I am, I feel so guilty right? I feel so guilty that I need to rely on someone else, which is the negative of the gift giving economy. And it also gets around this entitled mentality of I did X, and so I must have this benefit from the transactional economy. Because when you do it yourself, you either made something or you didn't, right? You don't feel entitled because you actually earned the legitimate thing you got. You put it together, you grew it, you made it. It is 100% yours, so you're not entitled to someone else's time, you're entitled to your own time. And so that feeling of entitlement, of saying I'm demanding stuff from other people, which can be abrasive, which, can be a sticking point, right? Why is it that it takes you an hour to make one thing and it takes me 3 hours to make enough stuff to pay for your thing that only took you an hour? Isn't our time even, right? But, there are reasons for that. Yes, it's true that, a doctor doing surgery, well, it might not even take a full hour, depending on what it is. But at the same time, I somehow think it should be valued more than, an hour of digging ditches. So, where does that equation lie? Well, everyone's going to have a different opinion on that. And so everyone is going to have this competition of saying, well, my time's more valuable because I do this. And that's so important. Well, what everyone does is important in some way. Otherwise, they wouldn't be getting anything for it. But if you make something and give it to yourself, you don't feel guilty that someone else had to pick up your slack. And you don't feel entitled that you did something and therefore you deserve, you demand compensation. No, instead, you did something. And job well done. You feel good about it. Now, of course, the limitation of a self-reliant economy is, of course, you can't do everything yourself. For one thing, people say it's hard to cut your own hair. Imagine performing surgery on yourself, right? That's unimaginable. That would be so crazy. Just open heart surgery on yourself. That would be horrific. So, obviously not a thing. We are not islands. We can't be completely independent. And so, if we get rid of money, these are the three main ways to handle that. Either use something else for transactions, because transactions are important. They're what allow us to be able to be certain of an outcome. But at the same time, that certainty can lead to people feeling entitled. Where, yes, you did do something, and that was great, and you probably should be compensated. But compared to what? Compared to who? Is your time better than theirs? Is their time better than yours? How is that fair? And that gets into an area that doesn't feel so good. Then we have the gift-giving economy, where you give to someone and they feel accepted and loved and like, oh, you thought of me, that's so great. And at the same time, if they're gifting you food because otherwise you wouldn't have food, well, you feel pretty useless. You didn't earn it. You didn't make it. And so it's the opposite of feeling entitled. It's feeling like you don't deserve it. at all. And so that's the opposite end. And then self-reliance, making it yourself, well, that solves both of the problems on both of those extremes, but at the same time, you can't do that all the time. You can't do everything that way. And so, if we have these three different options, well, what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to live your life? And I think the answer is a combination of all three. That you need to be certain about some things. I shouldn't have to worry about whether or not I'm going to eat today. That's not good for me. But at the same time, who am I to expect certain things from certain people just because, well, I worked hard for it? Oh, yeah. But there are other people. They're doing their own thing. Maybe there should be a bit more voluntariness to that transaction. And then, of course, make it yourself. Because when you put your work, your effort into it, it's just more valuable. It feels better. This is why, even though the food you make is probably not as good as the restaurant, it still feels good because you made it. It's yours. And so, yeah, it might not be that amazing, but it feels really good when you do a good job. Even if that good job isn't 5-star restaurant material, it still feels good. Feel accomplished. Feel successful. And that's something you have control over. Even if you can't do that for everything. And so, combining those three things, I think would do the world a lot of good. And that's the thing, is we already do, right? The examples I used were transactions with money and charity and doing stuff yourself. We already do all those three things. So it's not some new, creative, inspirational idea. It's rather a standard that already exists that we have to hold ourselves to. That we can't allow ourselves to feel entitled to someone else's work. Where we should give and make other people feel good and loved and cared about through our giving. And we should be able to rely on ourselves to grow and improve and become better than we were yesterday. All three of those are important, and we can do all three of those today. And so, that's what we're going to talk about next time. Is today, we talked about what if we got rid of money? But tomorrow, why should we go through the effort of getting rid of it if we already can do all of the things with it still being around? So, I'll see you for that.